Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started just 2 minutes after when we wanted to start, so in legislator world, that's not too bad. But so far, we have been able to keep these hearings on time, both at the start and the end. We will look to continue to do that. Good morning. My name is Jesse Topper. I'm the chairman of the Performance-Based Funding Council. I'd like to call this hearing to order. For everyone's information, this hearing is being streamed live and will be recorded and available on our website at performancebasedfundingcouncil.com. Members of the public may submit comments for the record on our website at any time, and I would like to remind everyone to please silence their phones before we begin. Ms. Zachary, if you could please take the roll.
Representative Jesse Topper.
Here.
Representative Pete Schweier.
Here online.
Senator Wayne Langerholt.
Here.
Senator Jay Costa.
Here.
Deputy Secretary Angela Fitterer.
Here.
Ken Kaiser. Dr. Dwayne Pinkney.
Here.
And Dr. Sarah Thorndike.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Today marks the last of our hearings that the council will be holding at our state-related universities. Thank you to the University of Pittsburgh for hosting this final one today. I want to welcome today's panelists as well as members of the public who are both here in person and watching virtually. I will say that I believe the information that has been garnered from these hearings has been exceptionally helpful as we look to develop performance-based funding metrics for our three R1, what I would call our flagship universities here in Pennsylvania. It is unique what we are doing. We are getting input from a lot of different states, stakeholders, as well as the universities. But this is different. You know, we're not looking at doing this for an entire system. We're looking at doing this for a particular subset of our schools that we think are vital to what we offer here in Pennsylvania, not just from an academic standpoint, but also from an economic development standpoint, and what that means to the people of Pennsylvania, and also to demonstrate a return on investment for the tax dollars that we in the legislature appropriate to these fine institutions. So I think that thus far, the information has not only been helpful, but certainly eye-opening, and I believe that will continue today. No pressure, Dwayne, but we'll go ahead and start with our first panel. We will hear from Dr. Dwayne Pinkney, who also sits on this council. He's the Executive Senior Vice Chancellor for Administration and Finance and the Chief Financial Officer here at the University of Pittsburgh. So with that, Dr. Pinkney, please begin.
Hey, thank you, Chair Topper, and to the members of council and our colleagues. Welcome to the University of Pittsburgh. We're really delighted to have you here today, and I extend that welcome and greetings on behalf of Chancellor Gable and Provost McCarthy, who would have liked to be with us today. We're happy to host this third and final campus visit of the Performance Funding Council, and to the members of council and the entire support team, we thank you for a series of productive meetings, really good and robust discussion, as Chair Topper indicated. All designed to help us better understand the opportunity, really the space, the universe where funding models are deployed today, and how they're used and how they have evolved over time, and more importantly, how a good model can be developed for the state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth. The University of Pittsburgh is pleased to partner with the council and the state, our colleagues at Penn State and Temple, universities, and all interested parties and stakeholders in the recommendation of metrics, which is what we have been asked to do to support the development of a performance funding model for the three state-related research universities in the Commonwealth. We understand and appreciate the benefits of a new performance funding formula and what that means, what it can and will provide for the state, for its citizens, and including and especially for students and their families and current and future employers. We agree that it is critically important that a funding model for the state's related research universities align with the state's strategic direction and that it reflects the state's priorities. We appreciate that a funding model or funding practices that worked well in the past or a model designed for a different time may no longer reflect the policy preferences of the state today. To that end, we're excited to engage this work and join you in the identification and design of the appropriate elements and the metrics that demonstrate what our universities are doing today to move the needle on behalf of the Commonwealth in the achievement of the outcomes that the state considers the best reflection of performance and value. We're confident that metrics focusing on performance will yield the outcomes important to the state. A focus on performance and measuring that performance will yield far more impactful incomes and assure an alignment on more than just a focus on specific institutional characteristics that are unrelated to performance. Like you, we take seriously the concerns and questions regarding the value of a college degree. While the data and research are clear that completing a course of undergraduate study yields significantly more income for graduates over the life of a career, we know that students and families remain skeptical. That's why performance matters. And we need to demonstrate that we're focused on outcomes, success factors like graduation rates, persistence, degree production, and degree production in related areas, sustaining placement rates. And it's also important for us to recognize that while achieving improvement in these areas is critical, it's also important that we sustain excellence. So we don't want to place institutions that are doing well in certain areas at a disadvantage. We want to recognize and reflect that, and we think that that appropriate metrics and a model can do that. Our three universities have recently submitted metrics on which we agree. In the previous campus meetings, there has been acknowledgement that it would be useful to include one or two campus-specific metrics that allow these three institutions to reflect the specific aspects of their performance that is also aligned with the state's priorities. We too support this approach. Finally, we agree that a performance funding model should be based on new dollars rather than reallocating existing funds for the three research universities. By focusing on institutions competing against their current and past performance, such a model would be transparent, predictable, and simple while driving quicker, more impactful, and least disruptive outcomes for higher education in the Commonwealth. And I'll conclude my remarks by just acknowledging the commitment and the appreciation that we have here for the commitment of the council. For those of you who have supported these meetings, being a recent, I'll say a returnee to the Commonwealth, I'm impressed with the commitment that the Commonwealth has made and this in leadership to engage this work at this time. And so we are excited to be a part of this effort, and we do look forward to being a part of the solution to move the Commonwealth forward in this regard. You have significant assets. These three research-related, state-related institutions are impressive assets for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Your efforts demonstrate that you're interested in burnishing those assets and making sure that they're fully deployed to the benefit of the Commonwealth, and so are we. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pinkney. I'll get started. You talk about, in your last kind of comment here in your testimony, focusing on the institutions competing against their current and past performance. In other words, competing against yourself, right, in developing these metrics, which I believe is the goal, you know, of what we're looking at. We want to see areas that there needs to be improvement, areas that are already really solid to be sustainable into the future within, you know, what each university can do. It reminds me of hearing what Stan Sheets would always tell his board at Sheets, is that every year I'm looking to put my old Sheets out of business with my new Sheets, right? There's always that internal thought process. So what is that like from your standpoint as the CFO at Pitt in terms of reviewing programs, reviewing what's working? What are you using to establish what it is that Pitt's doing well and where are there areas that can improve?
So I'll offer that I just walked in the door, but here's what's immediately clear upon walking in the door, that the University of Pittsburgh, in its review of its academic programs, its academic offerings, all of its programming has been very intentional and has really worked hard to align its resources with the things that it does well, and to focus in those areas, and to also look to redirect and redeploy its resources in those areas where the university has advantage, that the university is focused on supporting the city, the region, and the Commonwealth. And I think that's evident in the work that the university is doing, operationally speaking, which I have a direct responsibility for. We are looking under every stone. We're turning over every stone to make sure that we are as efficient as we can be, so that we can redirect, or certainly make sure that we are emphasizing the core mission of the institution. The provost couldn't be with us here today. He could talk more about the specifics that the university engages to understand its academic programming, to evaluate its programming, and to make those changes. That work is within the provost organization. It is important work here at the University of Pittsburgh, and I think the evidence that we are doing it and we're doing it well is reflected in the outcomes that we see today.
So the infrastructure for review is already in place. So when we're talking about adding metrics, there's the ability already to kind of work that into what is already a systematic review and tracking of progress and sustainability within the university.
Thank you. Yes, that is accurate. We won't have to create or recreate the mechanisms for that review. That those are in place. We're using those today. It's not a matter of turning our attention is focused in these areas, and the mechanisms are in place to do the review, and I think that's reflected in how we operate today.
What's the average graduation time frame for a student? Is it 4 or 5 at Pitt right now?
So we track graduation in the 4, 5, and 6 year in those intervals. For some programs, those programs are more. They're 5-year programs in some of the engineering areas. Our graduation rates are in the. I'll have to look at some of my colleagues. Our graduation rates are for 4-year in the 85% area, and for 6-year it's stronger. It goes up from there.
Thank you. Senator Langerholt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thank you for the testimony. I want to just build a little bit on one thing that you said with respect to the performance-based funding and being allocation of new dollars going forward. And we've done a lot of, well, this is with the last hearing, we've elicited a lot of testimony over the course of these hearings with regard to what type of metric we're going to look at and different things. And one thing that I've been consistent on is the allocation of dollars that we do as a Commonwealth to higher ed, which I think is grossly disproportionate to what we fund K through 12. And understanding I get that there's 500 school districts, I understand that, but if you look on the national level, even Pennsylvania ranks very low in the amount of money that's allocated for higher ed, but conversely, very high in the amount of money allocated K through 12. So in that, I guess that build up to the question is, if we're establishing metrics, if we do come up with some type of metric to allocate new dollars to the universities, do we need to maybe during the course of our conversation talk about metrics that you may employ in the allocation of those dollars, or will that go towards historically what we've done with respect to tuition, the in-state tuition rate, or are you looking to if you kind of see where I'm going with that, is there, if we allocate those dollars, is it going to go right into the same pot with the money that we've historically given, or is there a need or a desire to maybe allocate that in a different fashion?
So I think that the model you design, that the Commonwealth designs, should reflect the direction that you want to take. And I can appreciate your question. I do thank you for the question. You know, we're focused on what we think are the appropriate metrics. Whether the model supports funding towards or contemplating whether to be an offset against current funding or tuition, let's say, or whether the model contemplates that the focus will be on new and and the go forward is what I kind of implied in my comments, a public policy consideration that obviously that you'll make. We will weigh in on that. I think that there is alignment among at least the three research-related institutions that we would recommend a focus on the go forward, and that would be on really thinking about new programs that really expand or advance, accelerate the strategic direction of the state and its the Commonwealth's priorities. I hope that's responsive to your question.
Yes, thank you. And just to kind of follow up on that, we had, I think it was when we were at Penn State, we had testimony from the University of Tennessee, or from, not from, from the state of Tennessee, and that was a question I asked. Their tuition rates averages $10,000, half of what, you know, our state relateds are. What impact would it have on your university if we were able to increase funding to be able to offset that tuition to that amount? Let's say that we could cut, let's say that hypothetically, let's say we could fund it to allow tuition to be $10,000 across all state relateds. What impact would that have versus spending that money elsewhere within the university?
Well, I think that would more immediately redound to the benefit of the Commonwealth in terms of its ability to recruit students to the state and retain students within the state across these institutions. And so if the objective is to recruit students and to retain students and to keep them in the Commonwealth, that would be a mechanism to do that. Operationally, for the universities, it's having an appropriation and being able to lower our price, essentially, gives us capacity that, you know, right now we are constantly weighing the sensitivity, right? If we meet the needs of students and faculty, we're having to meet those needs with the resources that we have, and tuition is such a big component of those resources. We are always having to weigh and to balance the capacity we have to make marginal increases and what that means operationally, what that buys us, but weighed against the impact that that adjustment can have on yield. So relieving some of that pressure would, I think, be an outcome that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Senator Costa.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. You referenced the 5-year plans with respect to graduation rates. Do you separate that out from your overall graduation rate, like you would say, of those folks who were in a 5-year program, you know, 75, 85, 90%? So that's also a separate factor.
Yeah, we definitely take into consideration the program, and so when we think about the number of hours to graduate, it's factored in so that when we report a graduation rate, we are, to the best of our ability, trying to reflect an apples-to-apples comparison. So we have to take that into consideration, the length of the program.
Yeah. And just a quick question, your opinion, I guess I'm asking. With respect to what's taking place in Washington right now as it relates to education. And given the metrics that the three universities have come up with, are you concerned that in light of what's taking place there may impact any one of the universities with respect to looking at data and information and opportunities to hit marks like 30%, progression rate, except 30, 60, 90? Are you worried that some of those things may impact those numbers going forward at all?
Well, to the extent that we're always attentive to events, whether they be a global pandemic or a disruption in funding, we're always attentive to those things that can impact the experience that we're able to provide for students. And so I guess the answer to that question is, are we concerned about any of the recent changes or guidance? We're certainly attentive and we're planning for. We are trying to anticipate impacts to the extent that we can so that we can minimize impacts to students and to faculty and the core work of the institution. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I believe our last question will come online from the Voice on High. Representative Schweier has joined us virtually, so go ahead, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Leader, and I've been waiting a long time for you to recognize that my voice does come on high, so thank you, sir, for that. Thank you for your testimony. Very quickly, we've had a number of conversations at Penn State and at Temple, and I don't want to say that I've beaten around the bush a lot, but I'm going to be a little bit more direct. And this is as much for you, sir, as it is for all three of our state relateds that are part of the performance-based budget process. I want to start by thanking you for acknowledging that so much of what we're doing is trying to invest in Pennsylvania students and lower tuition and try to support Pennsylvanians for going there. But throughout this process, we're kind of dancing around a question and a concern that I have representing a place like Allentown, where we are talking about Pell recipients, we're talking about first-time generation college or first-generation college students as a metric that can be used. We heard that Senator Langerholtz mentioned earlier from our friends from Tennessee, how they are looking to address kind of getting a certain type of student in there. We're not talking about traditionally disadvantaged students, however. We're not talking about Black kids. We're not talking about Latino kids. We're not talking about folks that are historically underrepresented and come from school districts, whether they're like mine or others, that have a higher disproportion of frankly overlooked kids. And so, in your experience, sir, or any of the research that you've done in preparation for today and throughout this process, is there a space for us, in your humble opinion, to consider either minority enrollment or enrollment from some defined traditionally underserved student beyond just simply Pell or first generation? And that'll be my only question, sir.
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question, and also for for how direct the question is today relative to the prior meetings. But no, I do appreciate the question, and it is a weighty matter. I would say that you've asked my opinion. I'll offer opinion. It's not necessarily the position of the University of Pittsburgh. But I do think it reflects the values of the institution, and I do think it reflects the efforts of the institution. We have, over the last 10 years or so, in the United States, it's not specific to the University of Pittsburgh, we have been wringing our hands over what we knew was coming. We have been aware that the nation is facing an enrollment cliff. We've talked about it, we've written about it, we've worried about it, we've planned for it. Our institutions have, in some ways, made specific efforts to mitigate the enrollment cliff, but there are factors that weigh into an institution's ability to enroll students from minority populations, from underrepresented, underserved populations, and we know the national discussion where many of those considerations are taking place. I would say this, you asked my opinion, that given the concerns that we've expressed nationally, and given our concerns with our national competitiveness, it is a challenge for me to reconcile how we could contemplate leaving any players off the field. I think we should be fielding the most competitive team nationally that we can. And members of that team will come from all quarters of our society. And so access remains important. How we go about that, the specific mechanisms of that, the timing for that, where individuals enter and where they exit in their educational journey, all of those things will reflect public policy. And I do think that we'll arrive in the best places where those things are concerned, because I do think that there is consensus that we don't have the luxury of leaving individuals on the sideline. The costs of that are high. The cost of including individuals in our economy as productive members of our economy, the benefits of that are significant, weighted against the cost of exclusion. And so, so you've asked my opinion. I think our institutions work to that end to try to make sure that we remain places that are accessible. The specifics of that are being worked out. We can do that in ways that do not discriminate against individuals and or groups, and our efforts will be focused in those ways.
Thank you very much. Dr. Pinckney, thank you for your testimony.
Okay. Chair Topper, if I
Yes.
could, I wanted to correct just before I leave that I made an error in our graduation rates, and I wanted to make sure that I restated. So our 5-year graduation rate is 85%. I said that our 4-year was 85%. It's our 5-year. Our 4-year graduation rate is 70%. When we compare ourselves against our peers, those are very competitive graduation rates, and we look forward to doing more.
Thank you very much. Our second panel, we will welcome Mr. Tim Jones, the Senior Vice Chancellor, Finance Administration, and CFO for the Board of Governors, State University System of Florida. It's not very often that in February we have someone flying from Florida to Pennsylvania. Usually it's the other way around. But we appreciate Mr. Jones. Florida is one of the states that we have been looking at in terms of a model, and for you to take the time to travel here to PA and be here in person, means a lot to this council, and I certainly appreciate it. And whenever you're ready, sir, you may begin. Just push that. Make sure it lights up red.
There we go. That better?
There we go. Thank you.
May want to question my sanity leaving sunny Florida and coming here, but I'm enjoying the cool weather. Originally from Missouri, so it's kind of nice to throw on the overcoat and mittens and hat. So good morning, Mr. Chair and council members. Thank you for having me here today to share our performance funding model and the success that we have seen since it was implemented 11 years ago. I have been with the university system for 25 years, with the last 16 years in my current role. Before we developed our model, there had been numerous attempts in implementing performance funding models, but they would only last a couple years before another new shiny penny came along to replace it. So I do have some slides that I want to share, and I think you have a copy of those in front of you that kind of looks at some of the little history, who we are as a system, because we are a little different. We are operating our model as a system, which is something that you're not looking at least at the moment. So I'll identify which slide I'm on as I'm going through this. So it should be slide 2. And so as you're aware, every state university system is structured differently, so no one model will fit everybody. We have a Board of Governors, which is constitutionally created to operate, regulate, control, and be fully responsible for the management of the whole university system. 14 of our members are appointed by the governor. We have 12 state universities, each with a board of trustees. We have over 430,000 students. Our universities range in size from 800 to 70,000. We have R1s, R2s, a liberal arts university, a Polytech University, and an HBCU that are all included in our model. So a very diverse collection of institutions. We have the lowest undergraduate tuition in the country. We have not increased tuition or fees since the fall of 2013. So our state has invested heavily in higher education. We have 6 schools in the top 100 public universities and 2 on the verge of getting into the top 100, which is one of our strategic plan goals over the next 5 years. And we're very proud of the fact that we have been named the #1 state for higher education in the country for the last 8 years. And a big reason of that is the performance funding model that we have put in place. So moving to slide 3, we were previously funded based on enrollments. So the more butts you could get in the seat, the more money you got. And it was needed because we were a growing state and we are still a growing state. But when the recession came, as is most often the case with higher education, we took significant budget cuts. And coming out of that recession, it was made clear to us by our governor, our elected leaders, and our board that they wanted us to focus on quality and not quantity. So we started in 2012 and spent about 2 years looking at performance funding models across the country. We talked to our elected leaders, we met with the business community and our universities to identify metrics that were important to them and metrics that we could measure and implement in our model. So in 2014, the board adopted a 10-metric model. So moving to slide 4, when we started on the model, we had 4 guiding principles to help keep us focused on what we wanted to accomplish. So we wanted to have metrics that aligned with our strategic plan goals. So we had over 40 key performance indicators that we had been tracking for years. We wanted to reward excellence and improvement because every university is coming from a different place. Some already perform well, so we want to recognize that. Some do not perform as well, so you want to recognize improvement. And we wanted just a handful of metrics. As I mentioned, we had over 40, so our board wanted to focus on those key metrics that were important to the state. And finally, we did want to recognize that each university has a distinct mission, and that should be considered in the metrics. So we have several key components of the model that are listed here. So our model is based on 100 points. Basically, each metric is worth 10. And we wanted to grade them just like they grade our students. We felt this would resonate well with the public, their parents, and other key stakeholders. We wanted to evaluate metrics based on the most recent year data was available. We didn't want to look at the average of the last 3 or 5. We wanted to look at year-over-year data. We don't weigh any of our metrics. We want to be very transparent with our metrics so the public knew exactly what they were looking at when we talked about a specific metric. The board decided early on that this would not be a reallocation of base funding. The base funding provided by the legislature and the governor was for specific educational initiatives that they allocated to each university over time. So who were we to say that those allocations were wrong and they should be redistributed? Our focus was to drive new funding through the model. And we had a commitment from our leaders that if we came up with this model, they would ensure that we received the new funding for that. We also wanted universities to have skin in the game. So the reward would be new incremental funding, and the stick would be a portion of their base funding would be at risk. So moving to the next slide, these are our 10 metrics. As I mentioned, each metric is worth 10 points except for metric 9. Here we have 2 metrics, each worth 5 points, so 10 points total. We were gifted with those 2 metrics from the legislature a couple years ago, and instead of changing the final scoring, we decided to replace an existing metric with those 2. So if you scan our metrics, we are focused on retention, graduation, degrees in areas that are important to the state of Florida and its economic growth, and postgraduate metrics. Are our students getting a job? Are they continuing their education? And if they are getting a job, what are their wages? Our last metric is a university choice metric. This is to recognize what is important to each university. They pick the metric, but we pick the benchmarks that they're going to strive to attain. It's important to clearly define these metrics from the outset, so everyone has the understanding on how these metrics will be calculated. So moving to slide 6. This is how we score some of our metrics. So when it comes to benchmarks, we look at our strategic plan. For instance, I'll focus on metric 4, which is our 4-year graduation rate. We had a strategic plan goal of 65%. So when we set our benchmarks for that metric, if you had a 65% grad rate or higher, you earned 10 points. We then scaled our benchmarks down so that schools who are not performing at the strategic plan goal level have an opportunity to earn some points. And there's nothing magic about the scaling. It was kind of what we felt like was prudent given where other universities were in terms of their grad rate. So for metrics that were not in our strategic plan, we looked at kind of the system average and set that at 5 points and scaled up or down depending on that average. When we look at improvement points, that is year over year improvement. So for each 0.5 percentage point improvement in the grad rate, you could earn 1 point. So with a 5 percentage point improvement, you could earn 10 points, just as much as someone who's already excellent in that metric. Moving to the next slide. In our initial performance funding model, we had a bottom 3. That is, if you were in the bottom 3 when it came to total scoring, you didn't receive any new incremental funds. This was obviously very controversial among our universities, but it was important to our board and supported by our elected leaders. So our board is made up of business people, and they likened this to rewarding their own employees. Not every employee in the firm is worthy of a bonus. Therefore, not every university was worthy of new incremental funding if you didn't score well. Believe me, this did help to incentivize our universities. Nobody wanted to be in the bottom 3, especially those who were poor on the metrics. They implemented strategies to raise their score. And there's a lot of end runs to try and get this changed, but our leaders and our board stuck together and stood by that model for 5 years. After 5 years, we felt we had the university's attention. Folks were buying into the metrics. Faculty, administrations were embracing the model. It became part of everyday conversations on campus. So we eliminated the bottom 3 and went to a continuous improvement model. So now we're focused just on improvement. So as long as your score is going up, you're okay. But if you decline 2 years in a row, you have to do a student success plan. What are you going to do for those metrics where you're not doing well? What are you going to put in place to help improve those scores? We hold funding from those schools until they submit us a student success plan. We measure those plans over a several month period. And if we feel like they have implemented those plans, then we will release funds to them. If a school scores below 70 points, meaning basically you're a D school, we withhold 1/2 of your new state funds. So if you were scheduled to get $10 million and you got below 70 points, you're only going to get $5 million. The other $5 million we allocate to our top performing schools. So there's the stick, and then there's a carrot for the reward. Our board just adopted a new strategic plan, so we will be spending the summer updating our model to align with those goals. It's also important to note that every year we take a look at our model and make tweaks when necessary. So it's not like we put this model in place and then we just didn't touch it for a few years. Every fall we hold a workshop to look at the metrics to see what needs to be changed. We make adjustments when it makes sense. We change definitions if we got better data sources. So it's a living, breathing, growing model. If you flip to the next chart, it says year one of performance funding. So we developed this stoplight chart as a great visual on how schools are doing. Whenever we are asked to present our funding model to the legislature, they always ask for this chart. They think it's just a good visual on how we have progressed. And you can see in year one, we had a lot of red and yellow across the system. And we'll take a look at, there's a university, FIU, Florida International University, based in Miami. And you can see that they had a lot of red and a little bit of yellow. Now, if you go over to the next slide, which is year 11, this is from last year. And I mentioned FIU, but you can see a lot more green across the board. So FIU, I don't know if any of you heard of them, but they are based in Miami. They have over 50,000 students. Over half of their students are Pell Grant recipients. So it's a remarkable accomplishment for that school that told us when we started performance funding that their students were unique, they have challenges, their students in school should be treated differently. But their president and their board embraced the model, and they have been our highest scoring institution the last 2 years, outperforming the University of Florida and Florida State. And I'll stop there, Mr. Chair. I think that's my last slide. There are some other slides in there just for informational purposes, but I'm glad to answer any questions the council has.
Thank you so much. I could ask questions all day. This is very good information. I'm going to go to the funding part first, which is the formula question, because I want to make sure I understand what's being done, because that's something else in addition to the metrics that we'll have to consider. So the governor's budget proposal set aside $60 million for the performance-based funding pot, which would be the new money, the increased money over the base. I'm going to say 30 million just because it'll go back to your example of 10 million. Basically, if everybody hit their marks, it would be 10 million per school if it were 30. Is it my understanding that that 30 million is going to be spent? So in other words, even if one of the schools came up shorter and only got 7 million, that other 3 would be dispersed between the schools that reached all their marks. Am I understanding that correctly? In other words, the new money is going to be spent. It's just a matter of if schools don't reach their allotment because of the metrics, that money will then go to schools that do?
That is correct. We're not going to return any money to the legislature.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
We're going to allocate it all. And the way we do it, so that 30 million is allocated proportional based on each school's base budget. Because we have, given the difference in sizes, 800 to 70,000, budgets are very different as well. So it's a proportional allocation, and you're eligible for your proportional allocation assuming you meet certain scoring benchmarks. But you're correct. If you're in the bottom and you don't get half your money, that half goes to our top 3 scoring institutions.
There's been a lot of talk in the development of metrics of what I call like a dealer's choice metric, right, where the schools choose their final metric. But then you mentioned that while they can choose the metric, the board chooses the benchmark. What are some examples of what some of the metrics are that are chosen by schools at various sizes and levels, and then how you apply a benchmark?
Okay, yes, sir, I can give you a couple examples, and I'll use University of Florida as one. For them, growing their endowment is very important, so they picked that as their choice metric. And then they gave us, we have all of our schools give us a three-year goals as part of an accountability plan. Here's where their data is now. Here's where they plan on growing over the next 3 years. So we looked at those growth, and they said they want to be, say they're at $2 billion endowment, they want to be at 2.5 in 3 years. We took that and we stretched it for them and said, no, let's get you to $3 billion in 3 years. So let's make it a little harder, not just settle for what you think you can do. Let's push you a little bit to do more than what you think you can do. And we have some, we measure 4-year grad rates. Some of the schools like to measure themselves on the 6-year grad rate, so they have picked that as their metric. And once again, depending on their goal, we're going to say no, because we have a strategic plan goal for 6-year grad rates of 80%. So if you want to pick that, you're going to shoot for 80%, not 70, not 75.
I have a
Dr.
handful of
Thorndike? Yeah,
questions.
go
Is that
ahead.
okay?
Absolutely.
I just have a couple points of clarification. So in your appendix, on your appropriations slide, you have an institutional investment column that's part of your appropriations. Could you explain what that is?
Yes, ma'am. So the legislature pulls out a percentage of every school's base budget and sets it aside. It's about 5%. We score the universities. If they score well enough, we will return those base funds back to the institution to use like they would any of their other base funds. But we hold that in reserve until we do our performance funding metric scoring and see where they land.
And what percentage is appropriations then of a typical university's total budget?
So the state investment piece and the institutional piece, which I think is a little over 695 million, if I remember my numbers correctly, 645, represents about 15%.
1.5.
15, yes,
Okay.
1.5.
Thank you. And so then the years where the state investment didn't grow and the institutional investment didn't grow, and your tuition didn't go up, how do your universities fund things like salary increases?
They have to eat those. So if they want to give out a salary increase, they have to find the resources to do that. If health insurance or retirement costs go up, they have to find the resources to do that. Now, the performance funding dollars that we receive here are not the only funds our universities get. They still go to the legislature and ask for additional resources for certain initiatives. We hope all of those initiatives are focused on student performance. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. But they do have the ability to ask for additional resources outside of performance funding.
Great. Two more quick questions, if that's okay. As you implemented this, how did the distribution of funds across the campuses change, or did it not? Meaning, each campus on average got X percentage when you started, and then over time, was that very similar distribution of the total funding, or did it evolve because some met their goals and some didn't?
It's still, the allocation is still based on the university's proportional share of the base budget. So that has not changed. So one of the issues we'll be looking at in our new model is how to change that, because what we found is, unintended consequence, if a university is successful in lobbying for more money outside of performance funding, their base budget's going to go up. So they're going to drive a larger proportion of whatever the performance funding dollars are, which means another school may get less. So that's something we'll be looking at changing in our next go-around.
All right, and my last question is, how easy was it to access the metrics that are post-graduation? Did you find an effective way to make sure you could gather that data?
So we work with the Department of Commerce in Florida, who has a relationship with SWIS, the State Wage information system, which collects data from all 50 states. So they are able to track about 90% of our students who graduate. We know where they're living. We know the wages that they are earning. The students we can't find are those who are working overseas or self-employed or have joined the military.
Senator Langerholtz.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for coming up. So I caught it right. The 15%, the 645 million represents 15% of what again, did you say? Of the total
Of their total education and general operating budget
across the whole state of
across the
Florida?
whole system, yes.
And so that 645, is that just, well, that's a state and the institutional investment. The other part is purely driven by the universities?
Yes, those are funds that are still in their base. They're not subject, they're not at risk of being taken away, so they have those resources they can count on. The institutional piece and the state investment piece, you get those funds if you meet certain benchmarks.
Okay, so there's additional state dollars?
Yes.
Not just that, what is it, 350 million in the 295?
That's correct.
Okay. The average cost of tuition, I see that on one of these slides back here. Is that $1,230 as of 2022-23? Page 15 of your.
So when we started this model, the current governor wanted us to get the cost of education down to less than $10,000. At the time, it was about $14,000 per student. The state has invested heavily in financial aid, primarily merit-based aid, and the institutions have invested a lot of their own resources in financial aid. So yes, the average tuition fees is now about $1,200 for a student.
That's not including like room or board, that's just tuition and fees.
Tuition and
But
fees only.
$1,200,
Yes.
is that yearly?
That's based on the most recent year. That would have been as of last.
I mean, for like 2 semesters, like a
Yes.
full year?
Yes.
Wow. Wow. Going back to the metric scoring, the performance improvement, you had indicated that if you increase, or if there's improvement by 5% in a given metric, it gives a score of 10. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so if, let's assume, just looking at, let's say, 4-year graduation rate for an institution, let's say that they have 38% 1 year. So they get a 1 point. Let's say they improve 5% to 43%. So that would put them, just based on that, at a 2, but based on that improvement, then they would have a 10 for that?
That is correct. So we
So let-
picked the higher of the excellence points or improvement points.
How does that shake out the following year? Let's say that they stay consistent at 43% the following year. Do they go back down to 2?
Yes, sir, they would.
But if they wanted to consistently hit 10, that either need to go up to 48, or that would do it. You can do that year after year, the performance?
Yes, that is correct. So the idea is that you're continuously improving if you're not already at that excellence level.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick note on the average cost of students. So that's the net cost of students. I think you indicated there's the state investment, there's state investment in financial aid and university investments. When by you net all that out, that's what the students are paying?
That is correct.
And the other question I have is you talked about, and I think it was within the space of what I'll call the bonus metrics, you talked about negotiating, so to speak, with the universities on, pushing them to do more. Who does that negotiating? How does that accomplished, and what standards do you look at, and how are those standards determine where you end up you want them to be?
Good question. I would say we do not negotiate with them. They tell us what their metric is going to be. We determine what their benchmark is going to be. We're not going to make that where it's impossible to attain, but we expect to see growth towards that goal over a period of time.
It's a system that tells them exactly where.
Yes, that is correct.
There was one other question I was looking at. Give me 1 second, Mr. Chairman. My question related to the gathering of the data in the performance-based funding metric number 1. You indicated that you've got other agencies within the state of Florida that support you along those lines. What percentage of student who's graduated that you're able to get information on to know how that's done, and to what degree do universities, I guess, ramp up their efforts to be able to track and follow their students post-graduation?
Great question. So we provide our student information to the department, our Department of Commerce, who has a relationship with Swiss, and they can count for about 90% of our students through that. A couple of our smaller schools, the 800 student school, obviously changes in data causes big fluctuations in their scores. So we do allow them to obtain information on the additional students that we're not able to locate. So if they're started their own business, if they went into the military, or if they went overseas, working over there, they can supplement their data with additional information and provide that to us.
And when you have graduates who go into graduates who go into a graduate school program, how does that weigh into with respect to whether they're hitting that metric? Do you
Yes.
account for those students who, like here we do a lot of research at the University of Pittsburgh. How do you account for those students who graduate but then go into research positions or go to graduate school along those lines?
So our metric 1 looks at whether you're employed or continuing your education, so that's a percent. So we're adding that together. So we're giving the university a credit if they're continuing their education for a graduate degree.
And last question, and there, you said that, I think I heard it right, that early on, if you were in the bottom 3, you didn't get any increase, and it was reflected in the top 3. But then you changed that model going forward to say that the bottom 3 still get something, they don't lose their increase, proposed potential increase, or did I not hear that correctly?
You heard that correctly. So initially, the bottom 3 scores in institutions received no new funding. And we changed that, so now everybody is eligible for funding. Doesn't matter your score, but you better be improving year over year, or you're in danger of potentially losing some money. And you need to be scoring at least 70 points or higher. If you're below 70, you're going to lose 50% of your state investment dollars. If you're below 60, which is a very low threshold, you're going to lose some of your base funding.
In practice, how's that worked out? How many schools lost funding or lost 50% of their funding within your system?
Over the last 6 years, we've had 3 schools fall below 70%, 70 points. We have 1 school in that category this year. So they lost about $7 million. So they were scheduled to get 14. They're only getting 7. And they're not getting that 7 all at once. So they, in the fall, they had to submit to us a student success plan. Here's the things that we're going to do over the next several months to get us in a position to do better on some of those metrics going forward. They'll report to us in March on how well they have done on implementing that plan. And if we feel like they have fully implemented it, we will release the other half of the funds to them. But that $7 million that they lost is gone. That goes to our top 3 institutions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And when you say lost of the increase, so they're still getting an increase over what they received the year before.
Right, they're still getting $7 million.
Right.
They would have got $7 million more, but that
They
is
had the
gone.
opportunity to
Yes.
get that more, but that's, okay.
And next year, though, it kind of starts over. They'll be eligible for about $14 million, depending on where they score. If it's below 70 or above 70, they may get that or they may not.
Thank you. Representative Schweier.
Thank you, sir. 2 questions for you. First is maybe a Florida-specific process question, and the second is a data question. Who sets your tuition rates? You said they haven't been increased since 2013, and I think all of us, as both Leader Topper and I both have high school seniors that are going into college next year, fascinated by that comment. So who sets the tuition rates?
So the legislature sets undergraduate tuition. Our board sets graduate and out-of-state tuition.
Okay, thank you. And so when you say your board, you say that for the state system, so independent of the institution.
That is correct. The institutions can come to us with a proposed graduate or out-of-state increase, but it is our board, the system board, that makes that ultimate decision.
Okay, thank you. Second question is a data one. I was looking at your undergraduate graduation rates or degrees conveyed, and they've been declining the last 3 years. Now, it could be just something as simple as you know, hangovers from COVID. It could be something else. But is there a reason why is your enrollment up, but your degree, your undergraduate degrees dropping? Is there a disconnect there? I'm just kind of curious as to why your undergraduate degrees are dropping slightly in a state that is, as you said earlier, sir, growing.
Yeah, some of that we believe is related to COVID and coming out of that. It also has to do with the students that are being enrolled. Obviously, our universities want to enroll students who are going to be successful. Sometimes that class that they admit may not be as successful as they had intended. So there has been a little fluctuation in the degrees enrolled the last couple of years.
Okay. That is, but is that equal across the, I think you said 14 institutions? Is that, are you seeing that across all of them? Is it proportional? Are there some schools that are doing better at conveying degrees, even in spite of the, you know, I'll call it the COVID hangover? Are there is there a discrepancy between the schools? I'm just kind of curious.
It'll vary by institution, and also we're seeing some of our universities focus more on graduate degrees versus undergraduate degrees. So your flagships like UF, Florida State, University of South Florida are slowly shifting from undergraduates to graduate degrees because the state of Florida has taken its community college system and converted our community colleges to colleges. So they can now offer 4-year degrees, which is very helpful for their local community. So students don't have to leave their local area, go to a university. So that is also causing a little bit of shift in the number of degrees produced.
Okay. And what is the overall, are the enrollment trends opposite? Are the enrollment trends of those systems increasing in spite of the number of undergraduate degrees conveyed?
Overall, our system continues to grow slightly. We haven't seen in Florida as a system what we're seeing across the country in terms of losing enrollments. We have a big demand for out-of-state students coming to Florida. Florida implemented a grandparent waiver a few years ago that allows students who have grandparents living in Florida to come and only pay the in-state rate instead of the out-of-state rate. So it's still a very attractive place to come, even with the changing dynamics in student enrollments.
Is there any concern that continued support for, let's be honest, students who are educated outside of the state of Florida coming in? Is there any concern about the number of availability of classroom space, of desks for native Floridians?
There is concern. The board does have a policy that limits system enrollments to 10% of out-of-state students. So we have some universities who are over that. We have some who are under that. And we're running about 10.5% right now. So obviously there is some concern. That's discussions ongoing because we don't want to be taking seats away from our Florida resident students. And this will probably be, decisions will be made on what we do with this probably over the next year.
I appreciate that. My concern, listen, I'm not a Florida resident. With all due respect, I probably will never leave Pennsylvania because I'm just one of those people. My concern as we move forward and deliver our create a system for us is to make sure again that Pennsylvania residents are the ones that are able to reap these benefits, number one, and number two, that we're not excluding Pennsylvania residents again based on anything from quality of their K-12 institution, traditionally underserved students, in an attempt to get more kids from another state. So I appreciate that. That's all quite helpful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Dr. Pinkney.
Thank you, Chair Topper. I'm just wondering if you could help us get some perspective on the scale of funding as we kind of think about potential comparisons. Could you tell us how much money Florida spends, public money, on higher ed? What's the, roughly, I know you might not have the exact number.
Yeah, I'll speak specifically to the university system. The college system is separately. This year, we received $4.9 billion in state support. That's for medical schools, our land grant institution, all in, about $4.9 billion.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You always know when you're on the hot seat when legislators ask for a second round of questions. So with that, we'll go to Senator Langer-Holtz.
Just a follow-up I neglected to ask, is that average cost, that is for in-state students, and is there a different cost for out-of-state students?
So we are only measuring in-state students. We do not have a metric on what out-of-state students pay.
And is there the residency requirement, what is that for, to be considered an in-state student in Florida?
It's very complicated, but you have to establish residency after you've been here a year. So if you come from another state, you're here a year, you've bought a house, you've established, got your driver's license, there are certain requirements you have to meet before you can switch over to be a resident student.
And there are not any requirements other than what plays into, the metrics for the institution as far as staying in Florida after graduation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Costa.
Yeah, very briefly, two questions. One, as you talked about tuition increase, is it a system-wide increase for all the schools? Or because you indicated that the schools come to you with a recommendation, or does the legislature select tuition for each institution?
So for undergraduate tuition, it's the same for every school.
Oh, okay.
Yep, it's not differentiated by credit hour. For graduate students and out-of-state students, it does vary by institution. Knowing that there hasn't been an in-state increase since fall of 13,
okay.
there has been no increase in any graduate or out-of-state tuition rates as well. And that's the policy that Florida is operating under at this moment.
And you mentioned also that you track salaries and the like. Do you track how many students, in-state students, stay in Florida, or the out-of-state students who come into the state to go to school? Do you track how many of them stay in state 1 year, 2 years out?
We have that data, but it's not currently part of our performance funding model. So we're working probably with this next change to performance funding, looking at internships, because we find that if students taking internship in Florida, they're more likely to stick around, and we do want our students to stick around when they can.
Thank you. So as I look at, for instance, Florida International was one of the examples you used from their improvement from page 8 to page 9. I assume that there was initial concern from the institutions about this plan, but as I look at all of the green that's on that paper, it seems as though there's been a lot of buy-in now from the schools, from the administrators. They have to see that this is now really putting them on a good track.
Yes, that is correct. That is not true those first few years. It was a very rocky few years. We had presidents who did not buy into the model and thought they could just wait it out, that it would go away after a few years. Those presidents are no longer employed in the system. And now whenever our board has to confirm all of our university presidents, and that's the first question they ask. What do you think about performance funding? And what do you think about this performance funding model? So they're getting buy-in from those new presidents as they come on board.
There's been concern raised about unintended consequences to systems that use performance-based metrics, that there will be somewhat of a cherry picking, not just of students enrolled, but also in terms of programs offered. You know, obviously we want to invest heavily in STEM fields. We want to invest heavily into research, into jobs that, you know, are producing, but a lot of these schools also have arts programs in, you know, maybe even education programs where you come out and you don't see the salary as the same as an engineer coming out of school. Have there been any schools that have been adversely affected in that way? In other words, they don't feel like they're able to offer the full realm of the college experience because they have to be so uber focused on graduation rates and jobs that pay afterwards?
Great question. So the short answer is no. We have two metrics related to the number of bachelor's degrees in areas of strategic emphasis and graduate degrees in the areas of strategic emphasis. Those areas of strategic emphasis is compiled by the state, not our office, but our Department of Commerce. What are our needs for the state of Florida in terms of economic development? What jobs do we need to be focusing on in the future? So we get that data, and universities know I need to have programs to meet those. But there's a balancing act, because you may say, okay, I'm going to put all my eggs over here in this, you know, engineering program, but then you take your eye off the ball and you've left out education. Suddenly education now is in that area of strategic emphasis. So you got to walk this fine line between growing to what the state's needs are and being able to maintain existing jobs that the state has.
Thank you so much. I am sure that you will be hearing from us as we move forward. Great information. Look forward to continuing to sift through the data. But again, we really appreciate the fact that you made the trip, that you've made yourself available to us as well as our staff for follow-up to what you're doing in Florida and to how maybe we can model some of that here in Pennsylvania. So thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you for having me here, and be bold. I mean, this is your chance to maybe make a difference in student lives, so don't be reserved. Go out on a limb. Our board did, 11 years ago, and it's paid off. So
Thank you so
very
much. Appreciate it. With that, we will move now to our third and final panel of these hearings. We'll be hearing from Amelia Matucci, and I hope I got that right. Okay, outstanding. Kelly Kane. Sorry, first of all, Ms. Matucci is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania School Counselors Association. Kelly Kane, Associate Vice Provost for Enrollment, Executive Director of Admissions here at the University of Pittsburgh. And Jamie Gilligan, undergraduate student here at the University of Pittsburgh. So with that, we'll begin with our testimony. We'll let all three of you offer your initial thoughts, and then we'll have questions at the same time. And we will begin with Ms. Matucci. Thank you.
Okay. There we go. Good morning, Chair Topper and members of the council. My name is Amelia Matucci. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania School Counselors Association. In addition, I'm also a high school counselor at East Allegheny High School. I've served as a high school counselor for 30 years, and much of my time has been devoted to assisting students in determining their future plans beyond high school. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of the invaluable role that school counselors play in guiding students through the complex process of selecting colleges and majors. As an advocate for student success, I want to highlight the essential support that school counselors provide in ensuring that students are well informed and prepared for their post-secondary education. School counselors are uniquely positioned to assist students in making informed decisions about their future. We serve as knowledgeable advisors, helping students explore their interests, strengths, and career aspirations. Through individual counseling sessions, group workshops on topics such as writing a college essay or completing college applications, and both organizing and bringing groups of students to various college fairs, we introduce students to a wide array of post-secondary opportunities that align with their goals and capabilities. One of the most critical services school counselors offer is college exploration and application guidance. We provide students with up-to-date information about different types of colleges, including public universities, private institutions, community colleges, and trade schools, through the use of career exploration programs, College Board resources, and local job trends found in the Occupational Outlook Handbook. School counselors also assist in navigating college entrance requirements, financial aid options, and scholarship opportunities, ensuring that students and their families make informed financial decisions. Additionally, school counselors play a pivotal role in helping students select appropriate majors that match their skills and interests. By utilizing career assessments, aptitude tests, and one-on-one advising, school counselors help students identify academic programs that align with their long-term career aspirations. We also work closely with teachers and parents to ensure that students are taking the necessary coursework to prepare for their chosen fields. Beyond academics, school counselors offer emotional and motivational support, especially to first-generation college students and those from underrepresented backgrounds. We demystify the college application process, break down barriers to higher education, and provide encouragement every step of the way. I personally rely on assistance from staff in many university admission departments. I contact them through email or by phone with concerns from my students and their parents, and they have been invaluable sources of information for them. Their assistance has provided a chance for some of my students to attend post-secondary institutions when they may not have done so otherwise. In conclusion, school counselors are an indispensable resource for students navigating the complex decisions of college and major selection. Our expertise, dedication, and personalized approach empower students to make informed choices that will help shape their futures. I urge this council to continue supporting and investing resources and incentives to increase student access to post-secondary education so that every student has access to the guidance they need to complete their post-secondary education and succeed in achieving their occupational goals. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Ms. Kane?
Chairperson Topper, council members, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Kelly Kane, and I have the privilege of serving as the Associate Vice Provost for Enrollment and Executive Director of Admissions at the University of Pittsburgh campus. I completed both my undergraduate and master's degree here at the University of Pittsburgh, and I am a first-generation college student who grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania. At the University of Pittsburgh, we take a proactive approach to recruiting, enrolling, and guiding students, not just towards their interests, but also towards high-impact careers, many of which align with Pennsylvania's workforce needs. I'm particularly proud of the number of Commonwealth students and families we serve. The fall 2024 class included the largest number of new PA first-year students in Pitt's history, 2,934. Through targeted admissions, outreach, and recruitment throughout PA, with a focus on rural recruiting and early advising, Pitt helps students explore fields with strong job placements and areas of need for Pennsylvania businesses, such as healthcare, cybersecurity, engineering, education, and business. Many students enter these programs knowing exactly what they want to study. Pitt's programs are well known and highly regarded. Our work is to identify those students and help them start a lifelong career of impact by bringing them to the University of Pittsburgh and helping them graduate. Our strong academic programs, nursing, teaching, dental med, health sciences, engineering, and many more, our state-of-the-art facilities and faculty with industry experience ensure that students receive a world-class education and hands-on learning. The opportunity to live, work, and engage with boundless outside of the classroom opportunities in the great city of Pittsburgh provides students a dynamic ecosystem in which to achieve their goals and successfully launch their futures. But many others discover their passion along the way. Pitt has numerous first-year exploratory programs designed to connect them with in-demand careers. We connect students to our Degree Finder tool, as well as help them find their major by allowing them to explore their interest areas to help develop a path towards their major. Learning outside the classroom plays an important role for students when it comes to building lifelong competencies and ensuring success at Pitt and beyond. With the catalog of opportunities, students can find, track, and share co-curricular activities and achievements in the outside the classroom curriculum known as the OCC. Graduate Career Foundations, Pitt Global, the Honors OCC, the Pitt Business OCC, Pitt Pharmacy, and Pitt Law dashboards. As I mentioned, Pennsylvania students are a focus for us. It's part of our mission as a state-related university and keeps talent here in the Commonwealth. We have multiple recruiters who are dedicated to recruiting and enrolling Pennsylvania students to our campus, particularly those students who live in rural areas. The University of Pittsburgh is one of 22 higher education institutions to receive a grant to improve rates of post-secondary education enrollment, persistence, and completion among students in rural communities. The Rural Post-Secondary and Economic Development, the RPED grant program, which awarded Pitt $2.2 million over 4 years, promotes the development of high-quality career paths aligned to high-skill, high-wage, and in-demand industry sectors and occupations in the region. I'm pleased to share that those efforts are already paying off, as the fall 2024 first-year class included 18% more students from rural counties in PA than fall 2023, 476 compared to 402. And it represents over 16% of PA first-year students enrolling. Our retention rates rank among the state's best, partly because of our work in enrolling great fit students and helping our students find a successful academic path. Pitt's placement rates are very high. 98% of our students are working or in graduate school within 6 months of graduating. Our graduates secure jobs quickly and in competitive industries, often through partnerships we built with major employers. Whether through internships, apprenticeships, or industry partnerships, we ensure students are educated and career ready from day one. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And Ms. Gilligan, first of all, we appreciate you taking time out of a busy student's day. Hopefully we didn't pull you from an exam or anything like that for today, but thank you for being with us, and you may begin when you're ready.
All right. Good morning, Chairperson Topper and council members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jamie Gilligan, and I'm a junior nursing student at the University of Pittsburgh. I want to share how state-funded in-state tuition discount has made it possible for me to pursue my education and how it will allow me to give back to Pennsylvania as a future healthcare professional. Like many students, affordability was among the biggest factors in my decision to attend college. Pitt's in-state tuition discount has allowed me to stay in Pennsylvania close to my family as well as my community while receiving a world-class education without being overwhelmed by a financial burden. Without this opportunity, affording tuition would have been so much more challenging, and I would have attended out-of-state school due to competitive scholarship offers. Pennsylvania is facing a growing need for skilled healthcare professionals, and I am committed to being a part of the solution. After graduating, I plan to stay in state and work as a nurse, helping address the demand for healthcare professionals in our hospitals and our communities. The Pitt School of Nursing has not only set me for jobs in the city of Pittsburgh, but has also set me up for my summer internship at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Pitt teaches the importance of clinical experience by equipping students with research opportunities and partnering with companies like UPMC to create jobs for medical and non-medical students alike to participate in. The state's investment in students like me through in-state tuition discount directly impacts Pennsylvania's workforce and strengthens our healthcare system. I urge the council to maintain keeping higher education accessible and affordable for in-state students and encourage them to stay local after graduation. By doing so, you are not only helping students like me achieve their future goals, but also ensuring Pennsylvania retains the talent it needs in critical fields like healthcare. Thank you for your time and your commitment to our university and the state of Pennsylvania.
Thank you very much. I'll start with Ms. Gilligan, since you're on a roll of testifying. One of the things we're trying to identify is why students select the big three, the Pitt, Penn State, the Temples of the world. You talk about you've wanted to go into skilled healthcare, that is your career choice that you want to go into. The career matching with the opportunities at Pitt, I assume, was a large reason for picking this particular institution?
Yes. So when looking at schools, I was really interested on which school had the best program to offer for nursing. In addition to that, which school was going to offer me the best opportunities. So being able to go to different clinical experiences, as well as being able to work hands-on at the hospital in my own terms, working a job, due to the partnerships that we have with UPMC has really helped me kind of gain the experience that will make me a confident healthcare professional in the future.
Thank you. And along the line of internships, Ms. Kane, you spoke about that. It's one of the things that we're looking as a potential metric, are internship opportunities within some of the spaces. How do you feel that Pitt stands up in terms of internship opportunities, not just in the Commonwealth, but in the nation?
Yeah, thank you for the question. One of the reasons we are able to successfully recruit so many students, in particular in the Commonwealth, is our ability to provide those internships and those co-ops with our partnerships of companies and hospitals around the Pittsburgh area, working with our alumni nationally and even internationally. We are able to provide those opportunities to students in all sorts of sectors.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Matucci, when you look at Pitt, Penn State, and Temple, our Research One institutions in Pennsylvania, and you have a student that comes to you and says, you know, one of my lifelong dreams is to attend University of Pittsburgh, Penn State, Temple. As a counselor, how do you kind of walk through what to look at in terms of these particular schools? In other words, is it well, what are you interested in? Yes, there's great, events that you can go to on campus, but what, from an educational standpoint, from a cost standpoint, how do you bring that all together as compared to looking at schools within our state system or private institutions? What is kind of a counselor's thought process when looking at these three institutions and what they have to offer?
Thank you for that question. I think the first thing we look at is, what are you interested in, like you said. If you want to come to Pitt, what are you thinking that you want to major in? And then we have to decide, is Pitt the best choice for you? It might not offer what exactly you're looking for. So what is it about Pitt? Have you visited the campus? Do you have friends who go there? Do you have family who go there? And then, like I said, making sure that that is the best fit in terms of their interests and the major that they want to go into. It may or may not be. And then the affordability piece comes next, because my students, the district that I work in, we're about 73% low socioeconomic status. They're afraid of student loan debt. That's something that I hear quite often. And so we do talk about the affordability. One of the big selling points of both Pitt and Penn State are their branch campuses. My students especially, my graduating class only has 110 students, so they're used to a smaller, more personalized educational experience. So for some of them, they may not be confident in being able to go to a bigger university like Penn State at University Park. So we look at, okay, maybe you can start at a branch campus and move your way in, and that gives them more confidence. That makes them feel less anxious about the entire college process, because many of my students are first generation. as well. So there are many factors that we look at, but I would say the main one, the first most important one is, okay, well, what are your interests? What do you want to study? Making sure that they're not transferring universities, after a year or two.
One of the conversations that's been consistent as we've talked about developing metrics, and I know the concern's been raised from some of my colleagues as well as some of the schools, we don't want to be seen as disincentivizing schools to take a chance on a student for whatever reason that perhaps they would not, because they're afraid of the metrics. On the other hand, we also don't want to set students up for failure. We want to set them up for success. So I would think your position, Ms. Kane, your position, these would be the boots on the ground that we would count on to make those kind of determinations, right? The difference between taking a chance on a student that you believe can succeed in the environment versus not putting a student in an environment, like you just mentioned, Ms. Matucci, that almost, if it doesn't guarantee their failure, it certainly puts them in the situation where they're on a path that they're just not ready for. That balance between knowing the student and knowing what the university will require, I assume requires already a certain amount of communication in the world of accepting admissions. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. A lot of communication goes between the school counselors and the college admissions team, especially if it's a student that we would quote unquote take a risk on, because a lot of times there's some backstory that we don't know or some things that we might not necessarily see. So that those conversations are already happening.
Do you envision any kind of performance-based metrics as intruding upon that relationship in any way?
I don't believe so. I think we are already having those conversations. I think that, at least I can only speak for the University of Pittsburgh, but our goal is when we hand a student an admissions letter is to believe that they are going to be successful, graduate, and have a successful career. And if we don't believe that now, we wouldn't offer them that letter. And I think having these metrics just really helps with the work that we're already doing.
Thank you. Senator Langerholtz?
Thank you. Thank you all for your testimony. Ms. Matucci, in your role as counselor at East Allegheny, do you have an idea of what percentage of your class, you said about 110, I think, what percentage of your class goes on to college?
It has decreased over the years. And like I said, I've been there 30 years. We're probably only to about maybe, if you're counting, are you counting 4-year, 2-year community
4-year.
college?
Yeah,
2 and 4-year community college, I would say we're probably at about 65%.
And then what of that 65%, what percent stay within Pennsylvania?
We don't measure that particularly, but I can say with my school, we're smaller. Many of our students stay in the region, and I know that because I plan an alumni career fair every year, so I invite back alumni to talk to our current students. So I do know that the majority of my students stay in the area.
Okay, and then in there, I guess they come to you asking, where can we go, what can we do, here's what we're interested in. How much of your guidance is done with a view towards keeping them in state?
Usually that's what I'm thinking of as the job market, and because for my students, the bottom line is where can I be gainfully employed and make a good living? That's what they want. So that's what I'm looking at, the local job statistics and their ability to get and retain a job within Pennsylvania. So that's usually my lens where I'm coming from, because that's what I know, basically.
Thank you. Ms. Kane, I think I asked this question when we were in State College. I'll ask you, what would it mean to admissions if we were able to cut tuition in half?
I don't know if my smile is saying it enough, but to make higher education affordable, I think is huge. I think I also see students who come, say Pitt's been my dream school, I've been wearing blue and gold my entire life, and I just can't afford to come here. Those students, we work with them. We suggest one of our regional campuses where the tuition might be a little lower. We suggest community college and then work with them to transfer to the University of Pittsburgh. Because I say if Pitt is your dream, I want to try and make it happen. But for them to be able to complete 4 years on this campus, I think would be, it would be life-changing for so many students.
Thank you, and thank you for what you do. Our daughter is a freshman here, and she loves it, so good work. And Ms. Gilligan, no questions, but thank you for your testimony and for engaging in a noble profession. You will do well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dr. Pinckney.
Hey, just a quick question, Ms. Kane. I was wondering if you could tell us what the retention is or how many students, Pitt graduates, stay in the state upon graduation.
So I don't have that data. I apologize, but I can absolutely get that for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Costa.
Thank you. First, Ms. Kane, for 20-plus years, I've been entertaining interns through the Institute of Politics program, and I'm sure many of my colleagues do. Outstanding every semester, you all send great folks. So I'm a big and firm believer in the internships and externships and how important they are in terms of trying to have students retain in Pennsylvania. So thank you for the programming in your testimony. Ms. Matitucci, if I'm saying it, I apologize, but quick question I have is in terms of one of the metrics we're looking at is high demand occupations. How do you learn through your role, how do you learn what they are, how do you gain information along those lines, and more importantly, as we work in your relationship with the universities, how do you work to maybe encourage folks to move into those fields? Because at the end of the day, it ultimately has an impact on schools that students are going to.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I rely on the universities to give me that information about what the high demand careers are. I work very closely, like I said, with all of the admissions departments. I'm there when they come in and do their visits with my students at the high school. So I listen to them, I hear what majors and what programs they're now offering, and I rely on them to let me know. But it's also, many of us use these career exploration programs. In my district, we use Smart Futures, but there's Zello, there's Naviance, there's various others. And those are also continuously updated with the latest data as far as the current statistics about which are the most high demand. And you're able to tell, they build in the data from the Outlook, Occupational Outlook Handbook, so you're able to tell what the outlook is locally as well as nationally for each job that the student might be interested in.
Thank you very much. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Ms. Federer.
Good morning. Thank you all for your testimony. Ms. Kane, I had a question. I was just curious to learn a little bit more about the grant that you got focused on rural students. I heard you say that you're looking at in-demand career fields. I was just curious more about the students that you pulled in through that program, if there were factors or supports that those students needed, things that you were seeing that might be different from your student body on a whole, and how you're supporting those students.
Yeah, thank you. It's something we're very proud of, that grant in particular, because we have been trying to reach out to our rural students among the Commonwealth. We had one regional recruiter who was, it was kind of a pilot program. Let's see if we could get students from some of our rural counties to the University of Pittsburgh. It was a highly successful pilot. They did a piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education about him and the work that he was doing. And it was one of the reasons when we were looking at this grant, we partnered with our colleagues in the Office of the Provost, saying the need. We saw the need for these students, and they wanted to go to places like the University of Pittsburgh and perhaps never believed that they could. I grew up in a very rural area, and the schools that my parents suggested were within 20 minutes of where I grew up, so I picked the opposite corner of the state and came to the University of Pittsburgh. And so to be able to find those students. So it's not that they needed necessarily additional support here on campus. They didn't even know that they would be successful here. But that being said, we have our Student Success Hub, which wraps their arms around students when they come here, and they are able to provide support to these students if and when it's needed. You're welcome.
All right. Not seeing any further questions, I would like to thank this panel and all of our panels. Thank all three of you for your work in this space and for your testimony today. Once again, I would like to thank the University of Pittsburgh as well as Penn State and Temple for hosting these hearings as we have traveled around and received testimony as we look to develop a performance-based funding model. This is a model that has support, obviously, of the legislature as they voted to create this council. It has been in the last three proposals, at least in the speeches from the governor, so we believe that with the administration and the legislature wanting to get this done, believing that this can be effective, that we will get this done. We know that there's a lot of work yet to do. We know that the devil's always in the details, but I really would like to thank this council for the work that they have put into these hearings. I would also like to thank our staff for helping to put these together. I know that it is not easy. I really appreciate the work of all four caucuses and the staff members that have been involved. I would like to thank the staff as well of the schools to be able to coordinate everything that they have, from our accommodations to the rooms that we have. Would like to thank all of our tech guys who do a remarkable job. The fact that this can be done on the road and that we haven't had any major glitches is quite phenomenal. So thanks to each one of you for the work that has been done. I think it signifies how important we see the future of higher education in the Commonwealth, what it means to developing the workforce and the demographic changes that we need to see in Pennsylvania. We need more families to stay here. We need more families to come here. We need our institutions to be ones of great academic rigor, that support not just our economy, but that support the students, that those of us, as Chairman Schreier mentioned earlier, Senator Langerholt has students in this regard, has kids in this regard. As parents, we are sending our kind of mini adults to your institutions. And those are big decisions. It's difficult. It can be a difficult transition. But the transition both from student to an institutional student and then back into the workforce or into continuing on with more post-secondary education, you're responsible for that. And we know that. We want to support you in that. We want to create accountability and transparency so that all around the state and the Commonwealth can see what's being done, the great work that's being done, and the work that needs improvement. That's all part of what we're working on together. But here's what we know. We know that no significant change can occur unless all of us are working together to achieve it, both in the legislature and at the institutional level. So I believe these hearings have also demonstrated that there is that cooperation, there is that willingness to work, and we look forward to seeing that as we move forward. At this time, there will be no further hearings by this council. We have a report that will be due at the end of April, and we'll provide information about future meetings of the council at a later date. But with that, these hearings are concluded. Thank you very much.